Welcome to AI Podcast. I'm Brian.
And I'm Kathy.
Today we're plunging into a really fascinating area. It's applied technology with some pretty significant real-world implications.
Yeah, we're taking a deep dive into this concept of a widespread low-cost sensor network.
Exactly.
Right.
Envisioned for boosting border security in some incredibly challenging places. Think dense forests, difficult terrain,
Yeah.
specifically like those in Western Kashmir.
And what makes this so compelling, I think, isn't just the security angle, obvious as that is. It's how it brings together so many different fields.
Wow.
You've got advanced sensors, AI doing the processing, really efficient power management, even satellite comms.
It's a real intersection, isn't it? Lots of cutting-edge stuff, sometimes with surprising links between them.
Definitely.
So picture this. You're trying to monitor a border, maybe hundreds of kilometers, through thick woods, over rugged mountains. It gets hit by extreme weather,
Yeah.
and there's absolutely no infrastructure there. None.
Right, no power lines, no cell towers, nothing.
And the mission, the ambitious goal here, is to create this persistent, all-weather sensor network that can automatically pick up any human movement.
Okay, so let's unpack that. It's a huge challenge. Where do we start? Maybe the requirements.
Yeah, let's look at the core requirements. They really make this a deep dive. Let's start with detection range.
Right. So the main goal is reliable human detection. We're talking distances of 100 to maybe 500 meters.
Okay.
And crucially, it has to work through thick forest cover. That's the kicker.
That sounds incredibly difficult. Physics must be a huge factor.
It really is. It's not just about making a sensor more sensitive. The foliage itself, it absorbs or scatters signals, sound, ground vibrations, electromagnetic energy.
Getting reliable detection at those longer ranges, like
Yeah.
500 meters in that environment,
Yeah.
that's tough.
It is. Typical UGS unattended ground sensors, their range for people is often closer to 100 meters.
Right.
Even advanced systems like Northrop Grumman's Scorpion Piston reportedly hit around 800 meters, but that was likely in, test conditions.
More open ground, perhaps?
Probably. So consistently hitting 500 meters in dense forest, that's a significant leap. It probably needs new sensor designs, better signal processing.
And it's not just seeing far sometimes. It has to be all the time, regardless of the weather or time of day.
Exactly. 247, day, night, heavy rain, snow, fog, total darkness.
Which tells you straight away, standard cameras just won't cut it on their own.
Precisely. You need sensors that can see when visible light isn't there or isn't useful.
Like thermal.
That points directly to thermal infrared, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Detecting heat signatures, works in darkness, maybe even through some fog or light foliage.
What else?
Low light imaging could be part of it, amplifying ambient light, and maybe even radar-based motion detection. Radar waves can penetrate weather and some vegetation better.
Interesting.
And the really sophisticated approaches look at multimodal sensor fusion.
Meaning using different types of sensors together.
Exactly, like
Wow.
having multiple senses. One sensor might hear something, another feels a vibration, a third sees heat. By combining that diverse data intelligently, the system gets a much more reliable picture. And importantly, cuts down on false alarm.
Right, you don't want alerts every time a deer walks by.
Not if you're looking for people.
Okay, now power. How do you power potentially millions of these things scattered across remote, inaccessible areas with no grid?
That's a huge logistical hurdle. Autonomous power is absolutely critical.
So solar, batteries.
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah.
Small solar panels on each node, plus battery storage for nighttime or bad weather.
And they'd need to last a long time without maintenance.
Months, ideally years, without anyone needing to go out and change batteries.
That seems almost impossible.
Well, that's where event-driven sensors come in. Think DARPA's N0 program.
Event-driven.
Yeah. The innovation is in ultra-low power electronics. The device basically sleeps, consuming tiny amounts of power, like microwatts.
Just listening.
Kind of, until it detects a specific trigger, a potential threat signature. It's tuned to recognize specific low-energy wake-up signals.
Ah, so it's not constantly processing everything.
Exactly. That drastically cuts power consumption. Combine that with efficient solar charging, and you can get that long, unattended operation even with cloudy days or snow cover.
Okay, so we have these tiny power-sipping sensors out there. How do they phone home? How do they report what they've found? You said no reliable networks.
Right. Secure communications are vital. Each sensor needs to reliably send alerts, maybe even small images, back to command.
And without cell service.
Satellite communication becomes the go-to option. It's the most dependable choice in those remote spots.
It needs to be secure too, I imagine. Encrypted.
Absolutely. Robust encryption is non-negotiable. You can't have signals being intercepted.
And satellites mean limited bandwidth.
Yeah.
Right. Can't send video streams.
Definitely not. The challenge is sending just the essential info and alert, GPS coordinates, maybe a tiny thumbnail image for confirmation over low bitrate links.
Like Iridium. Or maybe those newer LEO constellations.
Exactly those kinds of services. Each device would likely need a small integrated antenna to talk to the satellites.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly advanced, which usually means incredibly expensive.
That's the rub.
But a key requirement here is low cost, mass deployable. We're talking potentially millions of sensors. That's a totally different scale than most military sensor systems.
It really is. Just for perspective, the entire U.S.-Mexico border, which is huge, has roughly 7,500 ground sensors.
Wow. So this vision is potentially hundreds of times larger.
Potentially. So to make that feasible, the cost per unit has to be way down. Target is under $500, ideally aiming for $100 to $200 when produced at that massive scale.
How do you even get there?
It requires a different manufacturing approach, using COTS, commercial off-the-shelf components where you can, high-volume smartphone-style manufacturing.
Economies of scale.
Massive economies of scale. Current high-end UGS can cost thousands each because they're specialized lower volume. The hope is simpler designs and huge production runs could slash that price.
It's fascinating just trying to grasp the scale on all these competing demands. So, are there existing technologies out there that give us a clue? Things that tackle some of these hurdles?
Oh, absolutely. UGS networks aren't new. Militaries have used them for border and perimeter surveillance for decades.
What kinds of sensors do they typically use?
Usually a mix. Seismic sensors listening for ground vibrations, acoustic sensors for sound, infrared for heat.
Any specific examples?
A well-known one is Textron's MicroObserver UGS. The U.S. Army has used it since around 2008.
What does it do?
It mainly uses small, buried seismic sensors. They detect the vibration patterns of footsteps or vehicles.
Okay.
And it's pretty smart. It doesn't just send an alert. It can track the target's position, direction, even speed.
So give you more context.
Yeah, and it can trigger a separate camera module to snap photos. Gives you a visual record of what caused the alert.
That sounds quite sophisticated. More than just a tripwire.
It is. The MicroObserver uses a mesh network. The sensors talk to each other wirelessly, relaying data to a local gateway, which then sends it on.
And false alarms. Always a problem with sensors.
A key focus for them is minimizing false alarms. They use sensor fusion, combining the seismic data with algorithms to tell the difference between, say, a person and an animal before sending an alert.
And what about range and battery life?
Depends on the model. Larger units can detect a person around 100 meters, a vehicle maybe 300 meters. Battery life can be over 2 years.
Pretty rugged too, I assume. Military grade.
Definitely. Built tough, designed to be buried, hidden. Just a small antenna usually visible.
But the cost? Probably not $200.
Likely not. Given the complexity and capabilities, probably in the thousands per unit. So proven tech, but maybe not scalable to millions economically.
Okay. What else? India's been working on border security in Kashmir too, right? And that difficult terrain.
That's right. They've been deploying smart fence technologies along the line of control, the logs in.
Smart fence. So electronics combined with physical barriers.
Exactly. It's an integrated system. In pilot areas, they've put things like LiDAR sensors on the fence.
Using lasers.
Yeah, to detect changes. Also, infrared thermal sensors and regular CCTV cameras.
How does it work together?
The idea is if a sensor detects motion or maybe a laser beam gets broken, it automatically tells the nearest camera to zoom in on that exact spot.
A more layered reactive system. Has it been effective?
Reports suggest yes. The pilot projects apparently worked well and at a lower cost than earlier attempts at purely electronic fences.
How'd they save money?
By using more commercial sensors and focusing the high-tech stuff on the most vulnerable spots, not trying to cover every single meter with top-end gear, it's a hybrid approach.
So it works, but it still needs the fence and power lines.
Yeah, it relies on that fixed infrastructure, fence posts, power, probably radio links for data. Scaling that along the entire 740-kilometer border, especially in the really remote bits, is still a huge challenge, financially and logistically.
But it does show that combining different sensors works. It can catch, as they say, the slightest movement.
That's a key takeaway, yes. Multi-sensor approaches can be very effective and potentially more cost-efficient than relying on just one super sensor.
Okay, seems like combining sensors is a theme. What about something really small?
Mhm.
Something you could hide easily, where maybe you can't build a fence?
Well, Lockheed Martin developed something called SPAN, stands for Self-Powered Ad Hoc Network.
Span. What is it?
They're tiny sensors, like palm-sized, designed to be camouflaged, easily look like rocks, that kind of thing.
Goodbye rocks. Okay. What sensors do they have?
Seismic for ground vibrations and acoustic for sounds, and they form a self-organizing mesh network.
Like the MicroObserver, talking to each other.
Exactly. They route alerts automatically through the network until it reaches a gateway.
How do they power these tiny things for a long time?
Ultra-low power design again, plus integrated solar panels. Lockheed calls it field and forget. They can supposedly operate for years without needing battery changes.
Like the event-driven idea, mostly sleeping.
Pretty much. They stay in a low-power state. Only waking up the radio to transmit when they detect something interesting saves a lot of energy.
So a span node detects something, sends an alert through the mesh.
Hopping sensor to sensor, potentially, until it hits a gateway that sends it on via satellite or whatever link is available.
Have they tested this?
Yeah, they've tested networks of about 50 nodes. Shows the distributed approach works. U.S. Border Patrol, military branches, they're interested. Creates these wide area electronic perimeters.
And the cost on these? Still higher than the target.
Lockheed mentioned maybe $1,000 per unit at scale, which for some military uses might be considered expendable, but still needs to come down a lot for that million-unit deployment idea.
But it proves the concept. Small solar mesh network sensors are viable for long-term surveillance.
Definitely demonstrates that approach works in tough environments.
Okay, so we've hit seismic, acoustic, infrared mesh networks. Anything using radar in this space seems useful for seeing through stuff.
Yes, actually. There's a company, Camgian Microsystems, with their Prowley UGS. It's a hybrid system.
Hybrid how?
It combines a miniature low-power radar with a camera, both visible and thermal. They call the camera part ProwCam.
So the radar scans first.
Exactly. The radar actively scans for movement. Big advantage. Radar can penetrate some foliage, works in darkness, fog, gives early warning maybe hundreds of meters out.
And if it sees something,
Then it triggers the low-power camera to wake up and take pictures for visual confirmation. See what it actually is.
that sounds like a smart way to balance power use with reliable detection in bad conditions.
It is, and what's really innovative is the ProwCam has onboard AI.
AI in the sensor itself.
Yeah, the AI algorithms analyze the image right there, detect the target, crop it, and just send back a small thumbnail.
Saving bandwidth. Crucial for satellite links.
Absolutely crucial. The whole system is designed for low swap-C size, weight, power, and cost.
Makes sense.
Their CEO has even talked about aiming for direct-to-satellite alerts eventually, maybe cutting out intermediate relays.
And power. Lifespan.
Using high-efficiency solar, they're aiming for a really long field life, maybe 10 to 20 years per unit.
Wow. Does the radar add much cost or complexity?
Some versions use phased array radar, which is more complex and likely adds cost, yeah. But it gives good range for people and vehicles. Camgian has landed some big contracts with U.S. Special Operations Command, though.
So the military sees value in that hybrid radar camera approach.
Seems so. Better detection, potentially fewer false alarms in those really challenging environments.
Okay. So we've looked at quite a range of technologies here. Seismic, acoustic, thermal, cameras, LiDAR, radar, mesh networks,
A real mix.
each with strengths, weaknesses. But it feels like no single existing thing perfectly hits all those tough requirements for this forest border idea, especially the millions of units at super low cost part.
That's a great summary. We've seen sensors that are good at range, or weather, or power, or cost, but none seem to tick all the boxes perfectly right now.
Right. Long range through forest, 24/7 all weather, years of power, SATCOMs, and that sub $500, maybe sub $200 price point at scale. That's the unicorn.
It is. The combination is the real challenge.
Well, that sets us up perfectly for our next installment, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Join us next time on AI Podcast, everyone. We'll dive into a proposed integrated sensor solution, one that tries to combine the best bits of these technologies to finally meet those demanding requirements.
Focusing on forest security and, crucially, how to get that cost down for mass deployment.
We'll look at the sensor module they envision, the comms, the power systems, and, the potential impact of creating such a vast digital barrier. Should be fascinating.
Looking forward to it. And to our listeners, we'll continue this deep dive into these invisible watchers on Friday evening.